Anyone with a CO2 laser has probably made these LED lamps. They are easy to make, cheap to sell, and a great little product for everyone. But to be honest, I'm a little bit bored of them. Let's make something a bit different. I've just finished up reviewing this machine right here, the AtomStack Hurricane Desktop CO2 Laser. It's an amazing machine with lots of inbuilt features, so definitely check out the full review. But as part of the process, I wanted to do something to make my LED lamps stand out from the crowd, and this is what I came up with. It is an awesome way to just combine a couple of materials to really make them unique and different. So in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to make this, and we'll start with the material selection. Now, everything I'm about to show you in this segment you should be able to source fairly easily, but I will put links in the description area below to common sources for them. Now, the first thing we are going to need is a sheet of clear acrylic. Now, this doesn't look clear, but that is because of the protective coating on the top and the bottom that we can peel off later. Most importantly, it needs to be 3mm thick, and I'll explain why very shortly, but fortunately that's a common thickness in acrylic, so it should make it easier to source. Next, you're going to need a sheet of plywood that can be laser cut. Thickness is less important. We're probably talking 2 to 3mm, and it should be ideal. Now, once we have cut all the parts out, we are going to need a way to bind them together. Now, after a bit of research, the best product that I found was Gorilla Glue Clear. This should allow them to stick together without damaging or leaving marks on the clear acrylic. Now, when I say about leaving marks, one of the prototypes that I did, I used CA glue to hold it together, and you can just see in certain lights it was leaving white marks ultimately where the glue was eating into the acrylic. Now, this is on the back of the light, so technically you could argue it's less relevant, but ultimately I'm just pointing out that this is probably the best glue to do it. Now, obviously, once everything is together and combined, we're going to need a base to hold everything in position and ultimately create the LED light. Now, these are really common to source. You can buy them in singles, doubles, even bulk loads as well. You get the base, you get a remote and a USB cable to power them. Some of them can also take batteries as well. I should probably highlight, they also come in different sizes and with different finishing textures. But the reason that 3mm acrylic is very important is this slit right here. This is specifically designed to take that thickness. Obviously, too thick it won't go in, too thin and it will wobble about within it. And finally, as an optional extra, this texture I've sort of done on the wood on the acrylic, this has simply just been done with a bit of dye. Now, obviously you can use wood dye, you can use black, you can use different colours, you can probably even use food dye as well, and that will do the same thing. But as I say, it is an optional extra, and I'll cover this off later on how we created this texture. So material selection is nice and simple, and we're about to jump into the software, which again is going to be very easy to follow to achieve this effect. Now, one thing I just wanted to mention about the AtomStack Hurricane that I didn't cover in the main review is this can be operated 100% wirelessly. You can connect to it from your phone or tablet. You can do basic designs on it, loading photographs from your phone in order to engrave on the machine, and ultimately it cuts out the hassle of always having to have a PC or laptop connected to the machine. And I also know there's another big update to the software coming very soon, so it's going to be useful to see what new features are included in that. But ultimately, life can be made very easy, as I say, by being able to operate it from your phone. Now, we are about to jump into the software. The files for the Wolf's Head I'm going to be giving away for free with this video, so there will be a link in the description area below for you to follow along with. I will also be selling additional designs on my website, jamesdeandesigns.com, so definitely check those out. But for now, let's jump into the software and show you how to achieve this. Let me just cover off a couple of things. I will be doing everything in Lightburn today, but obviously Lightburn does have a cost associated to it. All the features we're about to do and use can be replicated in other software for free. For example, you can download and use Inkscape to do all the design work, which is a free vector software, and then you can use the AtomStack Studio software to run your machine and obviously cut out and engrave all the parts that you need to. The final thing I'll also cover off is we're going to be working with a Wolf's Head vector today. Now, there are lots of free resources out there where you can get vectors, such as VectEasy that I'm on at the moment, but there are different vectors and some will work better than others. for example, this wolf's head over here, whilst it is a nice wolf's head, what we can actually see is everything is all in individual parts. Now, ideally, we need a vector that has a good clean outline around the whole head. If I scroll down a bit, this one here is a much better example. It's much cleaner with a good outline, and then there are a few more just down here. So even though they have a good outline around them, they still have detail within them. So ultimately, that's one thing to look out for when you are trying to find vectors in order to do these type of LED lights with. But for now, let's jump over to Lightburn and carry on with our project. Everything we're about to cover in Lightburn is relatively simple, but I would always recommend having a base understanding of the software first and doing some sort of beginner's guide or video run through. I will link to my previous video in the corner of basic introduction to Lightburn. It's a little bit old now, but it will still cover everything that we need, but there are lots of great videos out there on YouTube. Now, in terms of the tutorial, I often find it easier to show you what we are trying to achieve, and then we're going to go back to a blank canvas and create it. So ultimately, this is what we are trying to generate. Two versions of the same thing, one for acrylic and one for wood. If we focus on the acrylic version first, we've got all these blue bits in the middle. These are going to be engraved and filled in, and this is ultimately the part that the LED lights hit and make the colour pop even more. The black outline is our cut line or our profile line, and ultimately there to be able to cut this out of the sheet of the acrylic. And the red line on the right is very similar to the black line in that it's going to be a cut line and just allow the wolf's head to all be cut out of the base wood that we'll be doing later on the laser itself. The first thing I'm going to do is drag in my wolf head vector on the other screen and just place it on the canvas. Now obviously this is quite large. We want to shrink this down to 150 millimeters wide. Now we want to make sure the lock is turned on because we want everything to remain in proportion. So if we hit enter and shrink it down, we can zoom back in a little bit now. I'm just going to drag this to one side. And then we're simply going to press Ctrl C, Ctrl V to create a copy of this vector, and we can put that to one side. So now we have the version for the acrylic and the version for the wood. We'll start with the acrylic like we did on the other screen. What we want to begin by doing is ungrouping all of these lines. So with that vector selected, we're going to right click and go to the ungroup option, and watch this dotted line change. This indicates whether something is grouped or ungrouped. And now that has changed, we know all of these have been ungrouped. The next thing we want to do is hold down the Control key and select the outside line. This essentially unselects it and just leaves the inner lines now highlighted. We want to put these on a separate layer. So with that selected, we'll come down to the blue box in the bottom left hand corner, and this now puts all of those lines on its own layer. So if we unclick, we can now see what's going on. It starts to look like the version on the other page. Now, in order to make the fill areas or the engraved areas for the highlighting, we're going to start by selecting the inner shape for the face. We're also going to then select the two larger pieces by the eyes, hold down Control and also click those. Now we're going to do something called an offset, which is ultimately creating a second line inside or outside of the shapes that we have highlighted. To do this, we'll come up to the Tools menu. We'll come down to the Offset Shapes option, and here we can set our offset distance. Now for these lines, I'm going to make it 2 mm offset. We want it to remain the inward of the shape, and we want the corner style to be rounded. These options on the right hand side, make sure these are all deselected like you can see here, and then click OK. And what this does is generate that second line on the inside of our shape, and this will ultimately be the area that gets filled in and engraved. Now there's a couple of parts that we left out up here, and we're going to do these now. The reason I'm doing them separately is because they're slightly smaller parts. I want to use a smaller offset within them. So we're going to hold down the Control key again, and we're going to just select all of these remaining parts that hadn't been applied to earlier. So with all of those smaller parts now selected, we'll do exactly the same. We're going to come up to the Tools menu, down to the Offset Shapes, and we're going to make this 1 mm this time. Leave all the settings the same as they were before, click OK, and we have now generated the two sets of offset lines for the inner engraving areas. So if I click outside now and deselect and zoom out a bit, that is essentially all of the work done for the filling in and the engraving. Next we have to add a tabbed area down the bottom, and this is the part that slides into the base that I showed you earlier. So what we're going to do is come over to the rectangle tool and just roughly draw a rectangle across here. Now the first thing that you'll see is that drew in blue. We need this to be on the black layer. So I'm going to come up to the arrow tool and then select the black layer from the bottom left hand corner, just so that both the black cut line and this rectangle are in the same working layer. The other thing I need to do is make sure this is 80 millimeters wide. So in the top left, we're going to now change this from 76 to 80 millimeters, hit enter, and then it is the correct width. But what we can just see is it's slightly offset to the actual outline that we need it to merge with. So again, holding down the control key, we're going to select that outer line for the wolf space, and then we're going to come up to the align option up here on the top menu bar, select that and go with the align centers. Now one thing I will point out is whatever is the second object that you select, that's what you're aligning to. If we'd have selected the wolf's head first and then the rectangle, it will have offset the alignment the other way. So we're going to click OK, and now this is all centrally aligned. If we merge these two shapes at the moment, we'll end up with these little triangle pieces here being a little bit awkward. So what I'm going to do is just use the arrow tool again, just to select that rectangle and make it a little bit taller. So now it's encompassing those two pointy bits there. We can merge these two shapes together. Using the control key, select that outline again, and then we're going to come over to the Boolean Assistant tool over here on the left hand side. And we want to use the union option. Watch what happens to this rectangle as I hover over it. It punches it all into one shape. So we're going to click OK, and we then essentially have the completed piece for the acrylic. We've got the outline cut in the black and we've got the filled in areas in the blue. So if we move over to the other side now to do the wooden piece, this one is really simple. All we're going to do is select everything and place this on its own layer. So we'll come down to layer number 2, the red one, and now these have all been separated out. So we'll center them back up. Now the final thing we need to do is just apply the correct speeds and power settings. We'll begin with the black cut line for the acrylic, so we'll come up to the black layer up the top, double click into this, and we want this to be 20 millimeters per second with a power rating of 50%. We want it just to be one single pass, so we'll click OK, and that is that one complete. Now for the blue areas, this is currently set to line. We need to change this over to fill. So if we drop down the menu, go to fill, and that will mean that will now be engraved instead of cut out. We'll double click on this to set the power and the speed. For the speed, we want this to be 500 millimeters per second and a power of 17%. Now with the line interval, I generally like to lower this down just a fraction. We're going to take this from 0.1 to 0.09 and then click OK, and that has set that one. And finally for the wood cutout layer, we're going to go into that one and set this at a speed of 45 millimeters per second with a power of 85%. Again, leaving it on one pass, we'll click OK. And that is essentially our file created in order to cut things out. Now, obviously, when we move over to the laser shortly, you need to treat these as two separate files. So when we're doing the acrylic piece, we're going to turn off the layer for the wood. And when we're doing the wooden piece, we'll leave that one on, but turn off all of the others so that they don't output. And ultimately this just allows us to then separate it as two different designs when we come to use the laser. So I told you it was going to be simple. It's now time to move on and let the AtomStack Hurricane do all of the hard work and get the parts cut out. Now when it comes to doing the acrylic, some people leave the coating on, some people like to take it off, some people even take it off and then coat everything with liquid dish soap because they believe it protects the acrylic when it's being cut. Me personally, I just like to remove enough of the coating for the area that is going to be cut and engraved. Now obviously before you start, two things to always remember: home your machine to the relevant corner that you run it from, and also set the autofocus just so you know it's going to be cutting it correctly. And bring in the plywood. Now I've already used this piece once to do the prototype, but there's no harm in using it again, so we'll cut the new head out over this side. So our two parts are now cut, and obviously that sits directly on top of that piece. Now a few things to point out. There are some very delicate areas that we've cut out, such around the eyes, so be careful when handling them because you don't want to break them and have to cut another piece. Also, some of the pieces on the edge of the acrylic are going to be quite sharp, so again, do be delicate when handling it. Now when you take your acrylic off, clean it before doing anything else. If we stick this down and then you realise there's fingerprints and things on it, it's going to be really difficult to clean it up later. Also, I mentioned earlier about some people using dish soap whilst they are laser cutting their acrylic. I don't know if the camera will pick it up. There's some like ghosting bits on these tighter cutout parts. Ultimately, that is what the dish soap helps prevent and minimises those little ghosting around the edges. Now the downside is if you cover this in dishwash soap, you've then got to wash it all off after and then dry it correctly and get off all the smudges. So there is a bit of a trade-off, but I'm just pointing that out as a useful reference. Now I spoke earlier about staining this. I would suggest staining this before sticking it down, because obviously you avoid then getting it on the acrylic and having to clean that up. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to move this out of the way and I'll show you how I created that effect on the wolf's face. So I've set up to do the staining. Obviously I've taped it down to make my life easier, but if you're holding it by hand it may be an easier method for you. Now obviously we're trying to repeat this type of pattern that I created earlier on. Now literally it's just a case of putting a little bit of dye on the end of the brush and just lightly dragging the brush across it like that, and it creates this pattern. Now the one downside to not gluing this down first is those delicate areas that I mentioned earlier have got a little bit of flex and wobble in them. So do be very careful. Now you literally just want a tiny bit of ink on the end, bit of stain I should say, and just drag it across. Drag it across and keep building it up slowly. It is a slow method to do it. Obviously you can put more on the brush as well, but ultimately the slower you build it up, the better it looks in the end. And also do it in different directions, so don't always just come in from the left, switch it over, do it to the right, and then say build it up bit by bit. And I'll come back very shortly once I've got this done. So I probably went slightly heavier on the top half than I did with the original half, but the joys of this is actually it means that none of them look identical, so everyone is going to be a little bit unique. Now obviously that one looks slightly darker than that at the moment because this needs to dry. So we're going to give that a few minutes, let it dry, then bring the acrylic back in and we'll look at getting everything stuck together. Now when it comes to gluing this up, do it however you feel comfortable. If you want to pour it straight out of the nozzle onto the piece, then do so. But obviously this is very fine detail work in some areas, so do be careful. The way I'm doing it is I've just poured a little bit out onto this plate here and I'm going to apply it using a toothpick. Obviously this is going to take a little bit more time, but it means I can be more delicate in how I'm applying the glue. So we're going to flip this over and start applying the glue. Now obviously you want to try and get it definitely in all the big areas, but also in some of these smaller areas as well, obviously to make sure that it sticks down to the acrylic and doesn't get knocked or moved later. Now with this particular glue, you do have around 5 minutes to work with it, so you sort of need to work fast, but not too fast. So I'm just going to put some bits on, spread it all out. The other thing to remember as well is that when you press this down onto the acrylic, the glue will spread out a bit, so you do want to make sure you keep it nice and thin and just apply almost as little as possible. So you will have seen me just scribbling over everything then. That's basically to get the glue as flat as possible. We don't want no bubbles because when we press it together it will leak out the edges. The other thing I should have pointed out, this is actually the first time I'm using Gorilla Clear glue. So yeah, to do it on camera, well, I'm being a little bit brave, but let's see how we go. So we're going to pull the acrylic in. I'm actually going to move around the camera slightly, and you want to be as accurate as possible when placing this on top. So try and use a couple of pinpoints like the corners of the ears, just to get that in position. You can probably literally see how nervous I am on camera by the way I'm shaking. I think that is looking pretty good. It's almost one of those things, you don't want to play with it too much because you can guarantee the more you play with it, you'll end up knocking it and throwing it out of alignment. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm just going to place something with a little bit of weight on top of it to hold it down, and then we'll come back later when that's dry. So that is now all set. The only thing left to do is get this dropped in our base and see the results of what we've made. So we have the original one here, the new one we've just done as part of this tutorial, and they look amazing. Now I will be giving this file away for free, link in the description area, but I will also be selling additional designs on my website, jamesdeandesigns.com. So it just goes to show really some of the cool things you can do with a CO2 laser, and if you are considering one, definitely check out this one right here, the AtomStack Hurricane. The review will continue straight on at the end of this video, so just keep watching, but it is an amazing machine. I do hope you found the video useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe. And ultimately, well, yeah, thank you very much for watching, and final thanks to my patrons. I will see you all on the next episode.